I want to close the chapter on the Nations League because I know we've jumped from topic to topic here. When the tournament ended, what was your biggest takeaway overall? It doesn't have to be US related. It could be about the region, a specific team, player. Like, what were your big takeaways or biggest takeaway?
I'm not going to go US specific. I think you and myself, we both talked about US way too much. I'm actually interested in hearing what your biggest takeaway was. I think my biggest takeaway is one thing that I knew before, and I said this. I actually had Mexico losing to Canada, but I did say one thing in the video that was proven right within my mistake of saying Canada would win. I said that no matter how bad Mexico is in CONCACAF, you should never underestimate Mexico. History is on their side. So I said that in the video, and I unfortunately didn't follow my own advice. The Mexico went on to win. But I think that's what it is, probably the biggest takeaway. You don't really underestimate Mexico. This is probably still one of the worst Mexican generations of all time, if not the worst, against definitely the best Canadian generation of all time. And I think, at least
Easily.
on paper, the best American generation of all time on paper, right? Not in terms of performance. We've seen teams with more grit pull up better results, but the worst Mexican generation just literally beat the best Canada generation. They didn't beat the US, but they won the tournament with the US. This might also be the best Panamanian generation of all time. So
I was gonna say.
yeah, so
I think it is.
the worst Mexican generation of all time literally beat the best Panamanian, Canadian, American generations of all time. So just goes back to that. Just don't really underestimate Mexico. For all banter aside, and don't worry, in the Gold Cup, I'll get back to picking on Mexico. Right now, I have to stay a little humble, right? Because I just got my ass whooped. But I'll go with that as my biggest takeaway. I want to hear what's yours actually.
Mine's kind of close to that. I think my biggest takeaway, being a month removed now from the tournament, is that the big four in CONCACAF are really, really close in level. I think that was my biggest takeaway. Is I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, if a few things changed in every game, except for the Canada stomp in the US, but in the other three games, if one or two things change slightly, right? If Canada doesn't concede an insanely unlucky kind of like bobble shot within the opening 40 seconds against Mexico, what happens? Right? If Matt Turner saves that shot against Panama,
Or
what
if
happens?
Sargent's ball that hit the post goes in.
Sargent off the post. What about if Jose Cordoba doesn't have probably the worst handball in a final I've ever seen in my life when it's 1-1 Mexico versus Panama? What happens? And so rather than, I think, pick each and every one of those individual moments apart, you just say, hey, the top of CONCACAF is more competitive than I thought, right? I thought there was a bit more distance between some of the teams, but I don't think there's a clear best team. Even though Mexico won, I do not think we're the clear best team in CONCACAF. I think we need to do more. I'm curious if you view the US-Mexico rivalry a little different after, the friendly that we had against each other, but also the last Nations League. Do you think that the rivalry is becoming more balanced now? Or again, do you think the Nations League was just kind of a one-off?
I think the rivalry is extremely balanced between the US and Mexico. I think the US, again, on paper, the US probably has better players, or at least players playing at a much higher level, in my opinion. But no, when the US and Mexico play each other, it should be a very balanced game. I think the only thing that's different here is when the US and Mexico face each other, for some reason, that's when the American players play to their level. That's when you see all of them perform like what we see for their clubs. I don't know if they get pumped when they're playing Mexico because they see it as a rivalry. I don't know if Mexico's maybe the only team they truly take seriously in CONCACAF, which it shouldn't be. You just talked about it. It's very balanced.
Yeah.
But usually, at least over the past many years, ever since COVID, after COVID, besides the last friendly where Pochettino just really didn't give a crap, quite clearly, he even sent players home. We're playing with pretty much a B team, and Mexico did take it seriously. Credit to them. Usually, the American players play to their level against Mexico. That's what's been happening. And sometimes even above it, like Tyler Adams scoring that goal from long range. That's not a Tyler Adams goal, but that happened, right? Pulisic plays well. McKennie, Dest. So I'm going to say that, no, I still think the U.S. is ahead of Mexico on paper, but you can't win the game on paper. We have to start actually performing that. And I think ultimately in the Gold Cup, we're probably going to see that. I think everyone's going to bring their best to the Gold Cup. I think.
Okay. That was going to be my next question. But before we move to the Gold Cup, I still think the U.S. is ahead of Mexico in the rivalry. I know some Mexicans will feel very emboldened by, winning the Nations League for the first time ever, breaking the U.S. three-peat streak, and of course, beating the United States in Guadalajara. But similar to what I said earlier about Canada versus the United States and how Canada has kind of like embarrassed the United States in games recently, Mexico, we've been bodied in some of the games against the United States. Like that 3-0 Nations League was one of the greatest ass whoopings I've ever seen. Like,
Yeah.
and from the Mexican perspective, watching that, it was truly painful to watch. It
Well,
reminded me of like Chile Copa America. It was really bad. And
but
so I
even World Cup
think it's way
qualifying,
too soon.
the game in, I think it was Cincinnati, the U.S. dominated Mexico 2-0. And when the U.S. played Mexico in the Azteca, do you had that
Y'all
moment
should have
where
won.
the U.S. should have won. Pifak missed the goal under the post. Remember that?
Yeah.
And Gio Reyna dribbling past like 5 Mexican players.
I think
Yeah,
Pulisic had a one-on-one that Ochoa like had a
yes,
great save on, but he should have
yes.
scored too.
Yeah, so again, it's like that game could have easily been 2-0 for the US in the Azteca. So
Easily.
you are right about that. The US has whooped Mexico's ass, kind of like how Canada has whooped the United States' ass over the past like 4 to 5 years. It's been kind of similar with some occasions where the other one pulls a result. Most recently, Mexico. Even though Mexico
Yeah.
didn't beat the US in this Nations League, they never played each other. But yeah, Mexico did win the tournament that the US was in.
And I think that's the missing puzzle piece, dude, is if you and I are both correct that the 2025 Gold Cup will be taken seriously, I pray to God it is, or honestly dissolve the tournament. I think it's embarrassing how we treat our own federational cup. But I'm missing that dominant win. You can even erase the word dominant. A win against the United States in a competitive game where everybody's trying. That's the one thing that I'm missing because the competitive games we've seen, but in this rivalry in the last 5 years, it has been all United States since 2019.
Do you think Mexico would have lost the final if the US beat Panama? This Nations League right now.
With no, not without Jedi Robinson or Dest or a proper striker. No. But if you guys had the full team, yes.
Okay.
I think you would have. I think you would have won. My theory on Mexico, which I don't want to spend too much time on, but please respond to my theory, is I'm not convinced the team is actually that much better. I just think we're in the Raul Jimenez era, and he is almost single-handedly carrying us back to relevancy. Like, I haven't seen a guy carry a national team like this. You don't watch Asian football, but there's a guy called Akram Afif who plays for Qatar.
I know him. He's the
Guy,
winger.
yeah, winger, cam, basically scored or assisted multiple times in every single game en route to Qatar repeating as Asian Cup champions. And he's got by far the best offensive output of any player in Asian qualifying, even though Qatar are in 4th place in their group right now and might be straight up eliminated. But he's just doing everything he can. And I kind of think Raul Jimenez is doing that. Like, you look at last US game, scores 2 goals, banging free kick. Look at the Canada game, scores a banging free kick. Ball bounces to him in the opening second off Bombito Shin, and he slots it away. Does Santi Jimenez score that goal? I don't think so, considering how Santi's looked recently. And then he scores a double in the final against Panama. It's like, how much is this Aguirre and him just being better than Jimmy Lozano, who was just a kind of a coward with the national team? Or how much is this, oh no, the squad is getting better, you know? Like, how do you feel about that when you watch this recently?
Well, I think Mexico's been better defensively, probably. That might be the big thing. And then on top of that, you have a player up top like Raul dropping braces left and right. I mean, he beat the United States in that game back in October. It was him.
Yes.
I think it's a mix of those two. Most of the players, yeah, it's kind of like the same thing. But Mexico's been much more solid defensively. And then you add on top of that a player like Raul in the form and how he's playing right now, looking like his old self. Thank goodness he got back from that injury. It's probably a combination of those two. But the generation's still very weak. The team itself is still nowhere close to what we've seen with Mexico in the past. I don't see I mean, Edson Alvarez is great. But I mean, you guys had Guardado and Hector Herrera there in the team. I'm sorry, the players are not at that level, for example. That's your whole midfield, right? Santi Jimenez, he's not as good as a Chicharito once was. Carlos Vela is another player that you can even place there. Many, many others that we could go back even further.
I
But
miss that,
it's
man.
probably that a stronger defense than before, and also the players. Mexico's defense. When you have players like Johan Vasquez, you can bring season. Those are good players, also in terms of like back line. And then you have Raul in form. I think it's those two combined. That's what drastically improved with Mexico from 3 years ago, let's say.
Yeah.
Because Raul,
I would
remember,
agree.
after the injury, Raul took a long time to actually get it going again, right? So he wasn't really contributing.
Mhm.
There were many people even saying he shouldn't be with the national team. Remember that? Not so
A
long
lot.
ago. Yeah. And hyping up, for example, Santi Jimenez, that personally I don't really rate that player, but we're not going to get into that. That'll take too long. So I think it's a combination of better defending and Raul Jimenez just being Raul Jimenez again.
Yeah. Even during the 2022 qualifying cycle, like Raul was nothing special at
No.
all. He barely did anything. He kind of just scored our pens, and that was that, which he's still doing. But now he's impacted the game in every facet,
Yeah, the
which is great
dude
to see.
almost died on the field. It took him time to get back. It's not just physically come back, it's like mentally be back. I'm sure there was some level of trauma, mental trauma from all of that, that it seems like now he's gotten over it completely. But I would fully understand if the dude comes out and says, dude, it took me 3 years to like actually get over it. I mean, I've had an injury that's nowhere near comparable to his. I had a torn ACL. And when you come back, it takes you, at least me, it took me like 3 to 4 months to like get back into going to 50-50 duels. You're afraid for your knee. Now
Yeah.
imagine someone that almost died, right? Something that big. It probably took the guy a long time to mentally be back into the game.
Right. That's something that doesn't get factored in enough
No.
when we looked at how Jimenez was playing at the time.